My husband's ex and his mother tried to humiliate me for years until their almost anniversary stunt backfired, and he finally cut them off for good. For reference, I 20th, and my husband James 20th have been married for 2 years. James and I dated for 2 years before, but we'd known each other since high school. We didn't start dating until a few years after graduation. I met him at a restaurant unexpectedly, exchanged numbers, went on a few dates, and now here we are nearly 4 years later. Before I met James, he had been dating Sarah, another high school classmate. Sarah was a year below us and had known James since middle school. We weren't really close in high school, but we had many shared acquaintances, so I saw a lot of James and Sarah together. After we graduated, I lost touch with him because he moved to a college in a distant state, and we didn't see much of each other. When we finally reconnected at that restaurant some years later, I asked James about Sarah. He told me they had split up a year and a half ago. Sarah was the one who broke up with him because she wanted different things in life, needed a break to travel the world, but promised to come back to him someday. This, of course, meant she wanted to be free to date other men without guilt, keeping James as a backup plan. After the breakup, James remained friends with Sarah but reduced contact. By the time we met, he had nearly completely moved on. I had also started seeing him in a new light. He had matured a lot since we first met in high school. James and I reconnected about 4 years ago and soon became friends. We still have a laid-back relationship. She constantly tried to get him to chase after her because she thought it made her more attractive. She flirted with other guys, went out with her friends without speaking to him for days, and never asked James how he felt about anything. He stayed with her because he was young and naive, and he felt obligated to make the relationship work since they'd been together for so long. Another factor was James' mother, Martha 49th, who was a huge fan of Sarah. Sarah had met Martha several times during their relationship. James said Sarah did the same thing, showering Martha with compliments to impress her. They would chat about other people, particularly James' female acquaintances, whom Sarah despised. Sarah is also conventionally attractive, which made Martha appreciate her even more. James tried talking to his mother about it, urging her not to invite Sarah to family events, but Martha refused. She said she liked Sarah, and that even though they had broken up, they remained friends, so there was no reason not to invite her. This continued even after I started dating James, and he introduced me to his family. At first I felt strange about it, but I tolerated it for a long time. James first brought me to meet his family for Christmas 4 years ago. We'd been dating for about 8 months. Sarah was also there, and she treated me horribly the entire time. She made snide remarks about my appearance, my height, my clothes, my makeup, everything. She was skilled enough to make it sound like a joke, but James knew exactly what she was doing and stood up for me. Martha quickly shut it down and asked if I had a problem with Sarah's jokes, putting me in the position of seeming insecure or jealous if I said anything. So I said I don't care. It was petty of me, but when I said it I saw their surprised and annoyed expressions. That's when I realized I had done the right thing. When we got home, James apologized for Martha and Sarah's behavior. He promised he'd make sure his mother stopped inviting Sarah to family functions, but I warned him not to. I knew the type of women they were, and I didn't want to lose to them. I didn't want them to think they were intimidating me or making me feel insecure, because they hadn't, and I felt compelled to prove it. James was surprised by my approach, but he stopped interfering after that day. Since then, Sarah has attended every single family event Martha has hosted. Every time they act the same way: snide remarks, backhanded compliments, and constant attempts to bring up Sarah's past with James, even when it's entirely unrelated. I've confronted everything with a brave face and tried to remain as unmoved as possible. Martha has even said multiple times that Sarah would have made a better bride for James indirectly, of course. It was bothersome, but I tried to seem unconcerned because as long as James was by my side, I didn't care what others said. Martha and Sarah could talk for hours, and it wouldn't matter to me. That's how I handled things for the past 4 years, and I intended to maintain the same mindset for the next 4. I wasn't going to be the first one to snap. Now let's get to what actually happened, the incident that brought me here. Martha turned 49 3 days ago. Every year she throws a big celebration for her family and friends. This year James didn't want to attend. Instead, he wanted to go to his coworker's engagement celebration, which happened to fall on the same day. He had good reasons for this. His coworker was only getting engaged once, and they were really close. However, Martha refused to accept it. She made him promise to attend her birthday party instead. After days of pressure, she wore him out, so we decided to go. Sarah was invited to the party just like always. She was dressed to the nines, and for some reason so was Martha. But it was her birthday, so I let that slide. James and I had agreed to leave after Martha cut the cake and attend the engagement celebration. At around 5:30 p.m., Martha's husband Ben brought out 2 cakes. To our surprise, one of them said, "Happy almost anniversary." James and I were puzzled. We had no idea what the almost anniversary meant, and neither did anyone else. We waited for Martha to explain, but Sarah took over instead. She grabbed James' arm and dragged him to stand next to her. We were too surprised to react as everyone stared at us. Then Sarah began talking. She said that almost 10 years ago, on Martha's birthday, James had gotten down on one knee and given her a promise ring. They were both 18 at the time, about to go to different colleges. 10 years later, she still wore the same ring to prove that she proudly raised her hand in front of everyone. Sarah wrapped James in an awkward hug, which he didn't respond to, and Martha encouraged them, smiling. She explained that she was ready to let them steal her thunder this time so they could enjoy what should have been their anniversary. The entire situation was so absurd that James and I stood there, mouths agape. No one spoke, because what could you possibly say in response to something so insane? But Sarah kept going. She joked about James being her almost husband and Martha being her almost mother-in-law, implying that today was their almost anniversary, as if we didn't get the joke. Then Martha cut the anniversary cake and fed Sarah a slice. She then tried feeding it to James, and that's when he snapped. He backed away from her, and Martha, astonished, asked him, "What's wrong?" All hell broke loose. James exploded. He shouted at Martha and Sarah, calling them shallow, ignorant, and self-centered. He admitted that he felt humiliated to have ever been engaged to Sarah. He was even more mortified that he was biologically connected to Martha. He ripped into them for being the trashiest women he'd ever met. I have to admit I was surprised by his reaction. James is normally a calm guy. He rarely yells or gets furious with others, but Martha and Sarah had pushed him too far. After yelling at them, James stormed out of the party, followed by me. We took a taxi straight to the engagement celebration, and though I tried to talk to him in the cab, he didn't want to talk about his mother or ex at that moment, so I dropped it. At the engagement party, James' mood improved as he greeted his friends and coworkers. I was happy to see him doing better. When we returned home, James was in a much better mood, so I decided to bring up what had happened at Martha's party again, hoping he'd want to talk about it. Instead, I got an earful about how some of it was also my fault. James admitted that Martha and Sarah had tried to embarrass me with that ridiculous cake, but he reminded me that for years I had forced him to stay silent and let Martha and Sarah do whatever they wanted because I felt the need to prove I wasn't bothered by it. I had made it all about myself. By trying to show others I wasn't bothered, I had forgotten that James was equally implicated in this mess. He had been hurting while I was playing a mind game with people I didn't even like. In doing so, I had neglected his feelings. At first I protested, but after thinking about it, I realized he was right. I had pushed James to remain silent for years, while his mother welcomed his ex to family gatherings just to put me down. I had made a serious mistake, and I knew I needed to make amends. James had been giving me the cold shoulder since the party, and I had been pretending it didn't bother me. I skipped work today and decided to make it up to him. I got him dinner at his favorite restaurant and a chocolate cake with the words "I'm sorry" written on it. I set everything up to make it as romantic as possible because I know he likes sappy rom-com style apologies. He forgave me within 15 minutes of arriving home. We had a tearful reconciliation, and I cried because I was afraid I'd lose him. After supper, we discussed what happened at Martha's party. I hadn't heard from either of them since the incident, and my battle with James had pushed the whole issue out of my mind. But then Martha started texting James, trying to get him to apologize to Sarah, who was supposedly distraught over the way James had treated her. It was absurd. Martha claimed the cake and the anniversary stunt were just a joke, but I called BS on that. They did it on purpose to humiliate me. They had no right to act like it was a joke after everything they put me through. We decided to stop communicating with them completely. 3 days ago, we blocked Martha from all our social media accounts. James also told his father that he didn't want to speak with his mother anymore. His father was supportive of his decision, but he refused to intervene, saying he loved Martha and wouldn't leave her. Then, yesterday, James received a call from Martha saying James went to the hospital, and we both arrived at the same time, only to find out that this was a lie, just another attempt to manipulate James. Martha and Sarah were waiting for us outside the hospital. They tried to act like nothing had happened and started talking to James as if they were innocent. That was the last straw. James finally told them off and walked away with me. They started shouting at us as we got into our cars, but we didn't stay to listen. Since then, James and I have been doing better. We've decided to file a restraining order against Martha and Sarah after they threw coffee in my face at a coffee shop. This was the last straw for me. We've also made the decision to move and will be starting a family soon. We will be raising our children without Martha and Sarah in their lives. James finally cut off all communication with his family, and I couldn't be more relieved. It's been a few months since Shaw and I decided to cut ties with his mother Sharon and his ex Diane for good. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, but life has a funny way of showing you what matters most. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far things have escalated, how this situation has gotten so out of control that I found myself filing a restraining order against people who at one point were supposed to be family. After the coffee incident, things started to shift in a way I never expected. Shaw and I took a few days to process everything that had happened. I still can't shake the image of Diane and Sharon's faces as they stood there smirking, while I stood covered in coffee and whipped cream. It was surreal. I felt violated, humiliated, and honestly terrified. It had always been a battle of words and manipulation before, but this was different. This was physical. This wasn't just a petty family squabble anymore, this was an outright attack. The weeks that followed were a blur. Shaw and I took time to talk through everything. He apologized again for how he had reacted to me in the midst of everything, acknowledging that he should have communicated better and understood why I had felt the need to stay silent in the first place. But we both realized the bigger issue was that we had let them win for so long. The mind games, the subtle jabs, they all came to a head in that moment at the hospital parking lot. The decision to file the restraining order wasn't made lightly. Shaw and I had thought long and hard about it, but as soon as we received that call about what had happened at the coffee shop, we knew it had gone too far. When we walked into that coffee shop, and saw them sitting there, waiting for me, it was like they had planned the whole thing. They knew my routine, my favorite spots. I hadn't realized how much they had been watching me, tracking me, until it was too late. It wasn't just about the humiliation anymore. It was about the safety of my family. The way they were acting was completely unpredictable, and the thought of them knowing where we lived, where I worked, the places I frequented, it was chilling. Shaw had always known his mother and ex were capable of a lot, but this was the wake-up call that we needed to make real changes in our lives. We couldn't afford to let them continue poisoning everything we had worked so hard for. We both agreed we couldn't just let it go. For me, it wasn't about revenge or making them suffer. It was about making sure they understood that they couldn't keep walking all over us. Shaw knew what needed to be done, but we were careful to keep the focus on protecting ourselves. We didn't want them to know they had the power to break us because they didn't. After the restraining order, things didn't quiet down immediately. Sharon, always the manipulator, tried to play the martyr. She sent Shaw multiple texts begging him to forgive her, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that Diane had gotten carried away, and that she never meant to hurt us. She didn't think I would see them, but the messages were almost comical. The way she tried to twist reality, as though she hadn't humiliated me in front of everyone at her birthday party, as though she hadn't been the one pushing Diane to act out. But Shaw saw through it. He didn't respond to her texts. We both agreed that any communication with her was a waste of time. Then came the unexpected call from Shaw's father. He was furious. I could hear his voice shaking on the other end of the line, demanding answers for why we had done what we did. He accused Shaw of betraying his family and not giving his mother a chance to apologize. It felt like a slap in the face to both of us. He'd never stood up for Shaw when it mattered, and now he was questioning Shaw's decision to protect himself and me. Shaw calmly told his father that we had done what we needed to do for our peace of mind, and that was final. The last few months had taught us a lot about the importance of protecting our marriage and mental health, even if it meant cutting people out of our lives. Since that argument with Shaw's father, we've both felt lighter. There's been a sense of relief knowing we're no longer tethered to people who will never treat us with the respect we deserve. Shaw's father has remained silent since, and we've accepted that he won't be standing up for us, and maybe that's just the way it's going to be. We don't need his approval anymore. With everything that has happened, Shaw and I have spent more time focusing on each other. We've become more intentional in the way we communicate, the way we support one another. The ordeal with his mother and Diane was a wake-up call that we couldn't ignore. It showed us how important it is to listen to each other's needs and how easily things can be overlooked when you're too busy fighting battles that don't even matter. The truth is I'd been so focused on showing that I wasn't bothered by Sharon and Diane's behavior, that I lost sight of Shaw's feelings, of the fact that he was dealing with just as much, if not more, than I was. And that in itself was a huge mistake. But we've worked through it. Shaw and I have made a pact to put our marriage first, no matter what. There's no more pretending everything is okay when it's not. We've learned to communicate better, to address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. For the first time in a long time, we are both on the same page, and that's been the most healing part of all of this. As for the future, we've decided it's time for a fresh start. Shaw and I have been talking about moving out of the city, away from the people who have caused us so much pain. We are looking at new places, trying to decide where we want to put down roots. We've been thinking about children, about building a life that's truly our own, free from the toxicity of Shaw's family. It's a little scary, but we know it's the right decision. Our home needs to be a place where we can thrive, not just survive. I think about the way things have changed, the way Shaw has changed, and I realize we've come so far. A year ago, I never would have imagined that we'd be in this position. I never would have thought we'd have the strength to walk away from everything that had been holding us back. But here we are stronger than before and ready to take the next step in our lives. I'm learning to be more open, to be vulnerable, to show Shaw exactly how much I love him. He's been so patient with me, and I want to give him the best version of myself. We've come out of this experience as a team, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for him. So what's next? We've decided that we're not looking back. We'll always have the lessons we've learned from this chapter, but we are moving forward. There's a lot of work left to do, and I have to say it's such a relief not to be constantly worried about Diane and Sharon, not to be living in fear of their next move. It's been a journey, but I'm finally starting to feel free.